So this is where we left off in part 1. We finally got another chance to go ahead and continue with the second part. So let's go ahead and continue with evaluation part 3. So, in fact, less than 100 years ago, the institution of marriage in the United States did not include interracial procreation. Now, if procreation is important, why not allow interracial procreation? Alright? Because interracial procreation would mean more biodiversity in the human species. And the more biodiversity, the better. I'm going to go ahead and give you a short version of this, and you can go ahead and do the science and research yourself if you want. But if you take a look at the cheetah, it has a 70% around that number of mortality when it comes to infectious disease. Why? Well, because its cells are not able to distinguish between a cell that did originate from that cheetah or something that didn't originate from that cheetah, like a germ or a virus. So it just lets the virus or the germs infect the cells. The cells just let it do that. But why does the cheetah have such a bad, immune system? Why don't we have this? Well, because unlike us, 10,000 years ago, the cheetah population had a bottleneck, and that reduced the amount of biodiversity. We didn't have that problem. So we have a lot of biodiversity. And because of that, our cells are able to distinguish between a virus that isn't from us and another cell that is from us. So our cells do not start attacking or denying our own cells. Now, sure, it's not perfect, but we have a lot better protection against diseases because of that. And that's because of biodiversity, and that's one of just a few benefits of biodiversity. So if interracial procreation, if procreation and the betterment of the human species is so paramount to marriage, why were we making such a huge mistake 100 years ago? But this fact also shows that 100 years ago, the institution of marriage was a lot different than it is today. In other words, procreation isn't the only criteria of marriage, or the only purpose. There are tons of different purposes, tons of different criteria for marriage, and this is only one. So even if it were the case that all marriage throughout human history had something to do with procreation, it wouldn't mean procreation is the only purpose or prerequisite. It would only mean it's only one, because we've seen many different types. So the fact of the matter is, marriage has served many purposes, from sex, property, interfact relationships, and racial purity. It was meant to keep whites and blacks segregated 100 years ago. Alright, marriage is just a man-made institution. It is an artificial construct. It changes over time, and its purposes are dynamic and relative to different cultures. That is a fact. We created marriage. It wasn't floating around in outer space before we arrived. It didn't sit in the jungle for millions of years before we came here. So let's go ahead and go into perpetuation with evaluation part 4. So we're going to go into the perpetuation claim that, one of the reasons, justifications why P should be the objective is because of perpetuation of the species. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is the second justification. The reason why potential for procreation is a proper objective ground is that a female and a male human species is a completely unique relationship. Those two are all that is necessary and sufficient to bring the human being into life and therefore perpetuate the species. Okay, so this is the second justification. Perpetuation is good for the human species. An inference from this, though, is that if a couple does not have the potential to procreate, then the couple cannot have a marriage, because they can't perpetuate, nor do they have the potential to do so. While BeatMaster does the sterile couples as an exception to the rule, this is a severe mistake and a false assertion and false premise. Let's take a look at why this causes severe problems for BeatMaster's argument. Sterile couples, first of all, have no potential whatsoever to naturally procreate. That's what it means to be sterile or impotent. No potential. You cannot procreate naturally. You have no potential to do so. If you did, you wouldn't be sterile. Also, what if the sterile couple who had their children, what if there was a sterile couple, heterosexual couple, one man, one woman, And what if they had their genitals removed against their will? They could not even have heterosexual sex. So does that mean they shouldn't be able to get married? Because if you recall the two parts in P, potential for natural procreation and heterosexual sex, this couple would not be able to meet either of those two conditions. So if Beatmaster is saying that stereo couples have a potential to procreate, that is a false assumption. That is blatantly false. So according to the first premise in P, stereo couples cannot get married because they do not have the potential to procreate. This contradicts the exception made by BeatMasterPhil and exposes the following problems: a fallacy of contradiction and a fallacy of false premise. Now, I think that these two problems here, these two errors, are kind of mutually exclusive. Alright, basically, depends on how Beatmaster is using this. If he is saying that stereo couples do have a potential to procreate, then there's the false premise. Right, that is a false premise, so that error occurs. On the other hand, if he is saying that stereo couples should still be able to get married, then there's a contradiction, because the first premise clearly states if you do not have the potential to procreate, then you cannot get married. And if Beatmaster is saying that, yes indeed, stereo couples have no potential to procreate, but they can get married, well that violates the first premise. That goes against what the first premise is saying. That contradicts the first premise. Also, there's also another problem. Why single out natural procreation, or the potential thereof, as the ground? Why not artificial procreation? What's wrong with artificial procreation? After all, this is what stereo couples would have to use. So this exposes another problem of perpetuation. The fallacy of special pleading. He is singling out natural procreation and making a special case for that. And for whatever reason, ignoring artificial procreation. Why? Why ignore that? Furthermore, this is where we get into some really ugly mess here with Beatmaster's argument. It exposes some logical inconsistency within the argument. The argument is not logically consistent. Here's what I mean. Here's the table I created about his argument. Alright, so if his argument is consistent, if it's consistent, then we should see, well, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and explain this table before I get ahead of myself. You can see three main columns. One for stereo couples, that's a heterosexual couple, one man, one woman, who are sterile, a gay couple, or lesbian, and a couple that is heterosexual, has the potential to procreate, but they do not want to have any kids. They will not do any real procreation. They do not want children. At the very bottom, you can see married. You can see married right here. So, as I was saying, if Beatmaster's argument is logically consistent, we should see something that both the heterosexual couples have, the sterile and the non-procreating. God damn it. We should see something that these two have, the gay couple does not. If the argument is inconsistent, as I believe it is, then there should be nothing that the gay couples have, the homosexual couples have that the gay couple doesn't. So let's take a look. Under his argument, stereo couples can get married, and non-procreating heterosexual couples can get married, but gay couples cannot. So let's look at artificial procreation. Well, they all have this in common. They all have this in common. So this was the ground alone. If this was all that was necessary for marriage, they should all three of them get married, because they can all have the potential for artificial procreation. And furthermore, the gays in the stereo couple would have to use this. They would both have to use this to get married. So far, there's nothing on this row here that the heterosexuals have that the gay doesn't. So let's move on. What about the potential for natural procreation? Well, the stereo couples do not have the potential for that. Neither does the gay couple, but the non-procreating couple does. However, even in this row, there's nothing that the heterosexuals have that the gays don't. So we can't use this. We can rule that out. What about real procreation? Well, the gays and the stereo couples can, and if they want kids, they will use real procreation, artificial procreation. I mean, a human made from artificial procreation, such as of in vitro insemination and other similar things, those are real humans. Those are real infants. That's real procreation. And the gays and the straight couples are capable of doing that, and they would both have to use the same thing. And of course, the non-programmed couple doesn't want to have any kids whatsoever. They don't want any children. So in real procreation, we see nothing, again, that the heterosexuals have that the gay doesn't have. So what about potential procreation? As in potential natural procreation, according to variable P in BeatMaster's argument. Well, the straight couples don't have it. Again, they are sterile. They cannot naturally procreate. The gay couples don't have it, but the heterosexual couple right here does. They are fully capable of procreating, even though they don't want to. So as you can see, there's nothing here that the heterosexual couples have that the gays don't. So it really shows us that BeatMaster's argument is singling out homosexuals, targeting them, for no reason, no good reason at all. There's nothing here that the heterosexuals have that the gays do not have. So we have a fallacy of special pleading, right? He's made an argument saying that the heterosexuals, the straight couple, first he's made a general rule in his first premise, yes, saying that you have to have potential P or P to procreate. The straight couple violates that rule, but then he makes a special exception. That's special pleading. But another case of special pleading is the argument singles out homosexuals, singles out gays for no good reason. My table proved and demonstrated there was no good reason to single them out as not being allowed to get married. There's nothing that heterosexuals have that they don't. So we have a logically inconsistent argument. This argument is not logically consistent, and if it's inconsistent, it cannot be sound. Here we have a potential fallacy. This fallacy may occur. I'm not really certain about this. It appears to occur as potential fallacy. The potential fallacy of ad hoc. He realizes that, yes, indeed, there's a contradiction between, if this fallacy is true, of course, if this fallacy does occur, then he is realizing that, he has this general rule made, this absolute rule made here in his first premise, and that the straight couples violate that rule, but he, under his, beliefs, whatever, they should be allowed to get married. And so he makes a special case for that through special pleading, and it's really an ad hoc way of reasoning. He's trying to get himself out of a pickle, so he uses this special pleading fallacy, which again results in inconsistency. And the inconsistency occurs regardless if the ad hoc fallacy occurs or not. So we have that problem. And of course, that's not the only set of problems with perpetuation. Perpetuation P, the first premise, also assumes that there's a relationship between procreating and marriage. However, there's no such procreation. There's no such relationship P, procreation or perpetuation, either way. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this and I'll be right back. And I'll put this into section 3. Section 3, I'll get to this point here, because this is very important to my analysis.